One, two, three, four. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. Paradise was never gonna last.
Hi, Howard.
Hi there, Ollie. How are you doing, sir? You all right?
I'm good, thanks. Can you hear me and everything?
I can hear you perfectly fine. Yeah, can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yeah, fine.
Is that the studio where you recorded the whole album in?
It is, yeah. This
Yeah.
is the pretty side, which is why I do these that way, because it's the nice side. The other side of the studio is just complete chaos. There's a drum kit that I can show you. That there's a drum kit and a load of guitars and just nonsense all over the place. But yeah, we recorded the new record almost entirely in here. Gail, the other kind of original band member from the duo days, he's got one of these as well, like a little studio pod in his back garden. So he did a bit of work in there as well, but most of it got done in here, which is not a very big space, but it's amazing what you can.
I've been speaking to quite a few groups, especially kind of upcoming groups, and they've had to go completely homegrown and do a lot of stuff like in the attic in a shared flat and stuff like that. And it's amazing the things that they've managed to come out with.
It is amazing what you can do. You know, it is amazing.
I mean, what were the main kind of stumbling blocks for you having to do it there, and what were the kind of the reasons for recording it all at home? And also, kind of, was there any personal kind of anything you learned, I suppose, from kind of writing and recording everything at home? Was that kind of, did that bleed into the record and give it a kind of a very different feel to what you've done beforehand?
I mean, I hate to bring up the COVID word because it's so boring now, but I think really that definitely did influence things, because we're normally very, very into like making records experiences for us, because we know that if we make it, if we kind of design it to be like a new experience, it tends to help us kind of create a new sounding record. And so we've always, like the last 3 records before this one, we've done them all at Rockfield Studios in Wales, which is just a lovely old studio that's practically untouched since the 70s. It's just like, it's kind of like they kind of got it to that point where analog recording was its absolute best, and they kind of left it there. Right. So it's really nice to go there, and it's big, and you stay there, and it's like going away on holiday with your friends and making a record, you know. And we tend to try and do things like that, but we've done that a lot, and there's when we do that, you know, budgets being what they are these days, you can only sort of do that for like maybe 10 days, you know, which is super intense. And we'd done that for 3 records in a row, like forced ourselves to kind of go in one day, and 10 days later you have to have a record. And we've done that for 3 albums in a row, and this one we were just like, you know what, because of the way everything is, and it was just after lockdown, but it was like, because you kind of still couldn't be sure if more lockdowns were going to happen and how things were going to go. We just said, you know what, let's just use my studio in my garden, because it's pretty damn well set up, and we could make a record like over time, and we could kind of really use the whole summer to make something very different and much more layered, and really use the fact that it's in my home as an advantage, rather than seeing it as like kind of, oh, that's a bit boring to do that. We were like, actually, this time around, it doesn't feel boring. It actually feels exciting making something at home, because we haven't done it for a long time. So we really used it and spent a lot of time. It was over the summer, so we managed to spend a huge amount of time, like just kind of with the doors open of the studio, just hanging out in the garden and letting the music kind of come out and hearing it from outside, which became a really lovely way of listening back to things, is like if you're lying on the grass outside, you kind of weirdly hear what you're doing much more closely than you do if you sit right next to the speakers. Somehow it's that funny psychological trick. So yeah, we used this studio and the fact that it was so close to home to the advantage of the recording. I also think like the demos that I wrote and made for this album were so obviously sort of telling us to make a more of a homemade record, because they already were like that. They were really they just had a kind of they just had this personality that you could only really create sort of in your own very comfortable home space, like in your bedroom almost. They were kind of like bedroom recordings.
Yeah.
So we also thought, you know, it's actually the perfect time to make something like that. So yeah, so that's my incredibly long-winded answer to your question.
That's an incredibly perfect answer as well. But I mean, at the same time, because you said that you used to kind of dive straight into the studio now with 10 days to spare and get it all done and dusted. But with this one, because you wanted to kind of let things sink in and kind of come out naturally, did you find yourself kind of becoming kind of more lethargic, maybe about kind of just letting it go and see what happens, or maybe even more kind of harder on yourself, saying we're not getting anywhere, we've got to kind of battle on and try and get something recorded?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually we became I probably worked a lot harder in some ways, because I had to be like the chief engineer, I suppose, because it was my studio. So, and I know how it all works, and I've kind of got the sounds dialed in here. So in a way, I had a lot of work to do, and like but I quite like that. Like I really, what I loved about it was like the guys would all come, would kind of get together for a whole day. They put down their parts. They'd kind of have their suggestions, and we'd discuss things and listen a lot and kind of push things in directions that we thought they should go. And then they'd go and kind of leave me. And like for a whole week, I'd add things and shape things to kind of where I thought they should go, but also where we'd kind of like pushed things in the discussions on the days that we were together. So it was this so it was actually really intense. I did a lot of work, and the days that they were here were really full. Like we kind of, you know, we'd be like, okay, there's like 5 things to do today, you know, so let's get them done. So it was actually pretty hard work, but and also that thing of like you can't really switch off when it's in your own studio. You find yourself at like 2 a.m, you know, sort of like I can't go to sleep. I've just got to go. I've got to add that weird third harmony, you know, because I know that's going to be really weird and lovely, and I'm going to do it. So this record, like when I listen to this record, I hear all the layers, you know, I hear all the time and the layers that come from making a record in that way that you kind of can't get when you're like in a studio under loads of pressure. That's much more like the way we work then is much more sort of live performance based.
Right.
And we kind of set up live, do the best version of a song that we can live, and then we just tweak it from there and add a few things from there. This time it was much more based on like building it up from just a drum beat, you know, just literally drum beat. Now I'm going to put a guitar in. Now I'm going to do
imagine that isolation. I mean, that very much sounds like the drum beat was kind of like the kind of the structure, no, first of all, and then like imagine it all kind of build it from there. No?
Totally, which is how we used to make records when we first started. You know, we'd work like that. We'd have like a mini disc, 4-track or 8-track, and we'd sort of like have a very few tracks, and you'd be like, okay, get the drums down. Okay, next week I'll bring the mini disc round to yours and we'll do the vocal. You know, it would be like that. So it was kind of familiar in a way, making a record like that, but we haven't done it for a long time. We've been really live orientated for many albums where it's all about the live performance as a band. And I can imagine if we decide to make another record, I can kind of see us going back there now because we've had a holiday from it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because I mean, you just recently re-released your debut album, and I was going to ask you, because you've been kind of had this time to to kind of be really methodical and kind of go through each kind of instrument and really, it's not kind of as raw as it was before. I imagine listening to that and re-releasing must have kind of, did that have you kind of second guessing everything that you did all that time ago, or are you just kind of record an album and kind of let it live and let it be?
It's a funny thing. I mean, like listening back to that first album, I mean, that is like a time machine. But actually, I would say this record, the way we made this record was influenced by that first album, because we made it much more like that, which was sort of in pieces and in layers, and sort of like you'd really concentrate on one element and then you'd react to that musically, and you'd have time. We had a lot of time on that first record because we had a lovely major label budget behind us, and it was it was lovely, sort of a real luxury. And I think it paid off, because we made them a record that still seems to be liked now, but it was, so this record was much closer in the way we made it to that very first album. Funnily enough, it was Ether Song, the second album that we made with Tony Hoffa in Los Angeles. He was the guy that really showed us how to make a record based around a live performance of a band, so like getting at that point, like getting a load of really great players together, kind of having a few days just kind of messing about, and then setting up in a studio and just putting the mics up and playing live. And so much of that recording, that second album, is the live takes. I mean, most of the vocals were live, all the guitars, all the drums, all the bass. It was all just inspired in that moment. And you get a very different kind of record, when you do it like that, I think. And I don't know which one's better. It's like that you can kind of, I guess that's the nice thing about experiences. You start to work out when to apply different versions of a record, like when to make a record like this and when to make a record like that. It kind of depends on what the ideas are sort of telling you to do, and the ideas for this album were very much sort of to be done in that kind of layered, very, very slow kind of deliberate process. But it may well be, I can imagine that the next thing we work on will be like the opposite, because we're like that. We always sort of have a knee-jerk reaction to the last thing. So we're like, right, let's definitely do it differently,
But I mean, you said that you went through all the different layers this time. Would you say that was maybe also related to the fact that you weren't able to kind of practice tracks out in front of a live audience? Because I mean, all bands have just not been able to practice new material in front of everyone. So it's quite a gamble. I mean, you imagine more or less what people are like, because I mean, you're nine albums in now, but even still after nine albums, I imagine it's kind of I imagine you're still kind of nervous to see what people are going to, how people are going to react to the song. So it must be kind of complicated, especially the way that you said that you've written the songs now, not having been able to play them live, no?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was influenced by that, because we hadn't, I mean, up to COVID, we hadn't stopped for 22 years or something crazy. It was the longest break I think we've ever had as a band, and we definitely, we hadn't seen each other. I mean, that just not seeing each other physically is really weird for us, because I've spent more time with those three guys, or the four of us have spent more time together than anyone else apart from like my wife and two kids, and so it was influenced by the fact that we couldn't see each other, and but I think that the thing with those things is you just got to find a way to make those a strength, those imposed limitations. We're not very good when we have no limitations. I think we're the kind of band that, like, if we can do anything, we'll literally do anything, and it will just be a complete, like, crazy amount of chaotic different ideas, and then it's like this nightmare of trying to make
together
like this kind of one unilateral voice going through it all. I mean, our fourth album, Dark on Fire, that was a classic example of that. Like we'd never had so much kind of we'd never written so many songs in our lives, and for that album we wrote we had like 50 demos or something insane, and we got to the end of that record and we had like a double album. We had like 20 songs, And even now, when I listen back to that record, if I'm being, you know, really critical about it, I'd say it still doesn't know what record it wants to be. Like it's like 3 different records going on that album, and they could all have been really good, but together it's a bit. Even now, I'm confused by that record, you know, and so you sometimes these things that kind of limit you, an absolute blessing, you know. I always think you can probably make a record with like 1 laptop, 1 microphone, and a very few things, and you could probably make the best record you've ever made in your life, you know. And you could go to like, I don't know, the world's greatest studio with the world's greatest gear and have everything at your disposal and make an absolute pile of unlistenable rubbish.
When you've been going for 20 odd years, and a lot of the bands that kind of started around the same time, kind of the Britpop here, and just kind of after that, they're all kind of making a big comeback, or they've not stopped and just keep carrying on. What would you say? What was it? What would you say is behind all of that? Because I mean, like around the time of the Beatles, there weren't very many groups that kind of lived past them. They just kind of they were around for a few years and died off. But this isn't the case now. There's like a lot of groups that have been around for 20, 30 years and they're still going strong.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, isn't it? I guess it is like something to do with bands coming from that time, maybe the late 90s, early noughties, you know, or not even the late 90s, all the way through the 90s. But it might be that maybe they kind of worked out that you know, maybe part of it's like they're not drinking as much. You know, they're like they're sussing out how to, you know, stay healthy for longer because they've watched enough documentaries about rock stars dying at the age of 27, you know. That might have a little bit to do with it. But yeah, there's something about, I mean, we were saying this the other day, actually. We were listening back for the first time to like some sort of like indie sample CD from 2003 or something, where I think we were on it and that's why we had it and we played it in the car, and for the first time I could hear that time of music. Like I'd never really heard it as a separate thing before, and all of a sudden I could hear that time. I was like, oh, I listened to how much melody there is going on in this stuff, and how like it still sounds really organic and like wobbly and kind of alive. And actually, this does now sound kind of its time and quite different to what I'm hearing a lot of now. And you know, so maybe it's something about playing live, about how you can only really make that music. It's kind of hard to make that music without there being other humans to make it with. So like, it's like there has to kind of be at least 3 or 4 of you to make that kind of human sounding music, where it's like it's wobbling around and moving around, and it's kind of more in the moment. I think it's easy to make stuff that sounds much more rigid now, you know. And maybe that lends itself to kind of just being a solo performer, you know, and just like, in a way you can kind of like, you could just be a really good singer and turn up with a laptop now and press play.
No, not even that. You just turn up in the studio and just put the vocals over something else.
Put the vocals over, and even live, you know, you can just kind of have like, there's a lot of things now where it's just playback music and one person kind of doing their thing. And I think a lot of those bands from the 90s and the noughties up till maybe like, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, it was more about being in a group, you know. And I think there's more of a focus on, or there's more of a desire now to be an individual. And I don't know, you know, that's just the way the humans seem to be going at the moment. Maybe it's something to do with the internet. I don't know exactly what it is. Social media definitely encourages you to be on your own. I never
really thought about that, but you're right. There are kind of a lot of indie groups, but it's just kind of the lead singer that takes the name of the group. Yeah, you're right. I'd never really thought about it like that. Yeah.
Well, even if you think about even Instagram, the framing of Instagram and a lot of that stuff is portrait mode, isn't it? It's like it's like there's enough room for one of you. It's not widescreen. It's not encouraging you to get your mates in next to you and it to be like all about look at us all here together. It's much more like look at me, you know. So I think that does have an influence, you know. I really do. And it doesn't mean that it's all crap. There's some really
of course not. Yeah, of course not.
There's some great art. If you're a great artist, you'll find a way to make that really strong, you know. But I do think there's a big difference. But at some point, and maybe about 10 years ago or so, that took over from it, because before that, you kind of needed more people. You needed more people to make that kind of sound, to make a big sound. And over the years, it's become less and less important. And so yeah, maybe there's something in that, and that's why those groups are still, a lot of those groups are still going, because they forged themselves together with other people, and that kind of, I don't know, maybe that lends to playing live more and that kind of thing. And maybe they get something out of being in a group that you just can't get when you're not in a group, you know.
And now I've said, man, you've recorded the album and it's all set to release. You have recently played a festival or two. How did the new material go down there, and how are you preparing to kind of, because you're going on a pretty extensive tour to support the album? How have you prepared for that, having not been able to play as much as you would usually normally be able to play in front of a live audience?
Yeah, it's been, you know, we have done some festivals. We haven't been able to do as many gigs as we'd like, in a way, before doing a big tour. But so we've just made we've made every festival count, you know, and they've been actually some of the festivals this year. We one in particular, we did one at Cropredy in
I was looking on Twitter. You got some great feedback on Twitter from
that was absolutely stunning. Yeah, and it was the first time in a long time that we've been kind of on such a big stage in front of such a massive audience. It was an incredible slot. It was like the evening slot, just as the sun was going down, the moon was coming out. It had been the most boiling hot day, so everyone was like, you could almost feel the steam coming off people, and they were just happy to kind of, for the sun to go down and for them to enjoy the nighttime. And we happened to kind of soundtrack it, so it was just magic, and that really energized us and taught, you know, it kind of gave us a lot of confidence in the new songs, because we played at least 3 new songs there, and they you could really see people were really engaged with them and really listening, and so it made us feel like, okay, I think it's going to be all right, you know. And but we'll see. We've got, like you said, we've got this like 44
is it 42, 43 days? All over the show.
Crazy, you know. But we're like that, you know. We live on that's how we do it. You know, live is the next level up for us in terms of, you know, yes, we make records, but live is where they breathe, you know. It's like they really do come alive. And
sorry to interrupt you. No, I was going to say, I mean, you've got at least 43, 44 live dates. Do you like to shift things around, not in terms of just kind of the playlist, but also you said you like to live the songs in the moment, no? And kind of let things come out when they want to come out. Are you constantly kind of breathing new life into the songs in every concert? Just,
I mean, we
maybe
don't
for personal pleasure as well, just to kind of keep yourself enjoying. I mean, because 43 days, it must be pretty tiring.
It's funny. We don't often, once we get a set we like, it's like we don't change the actual set that much in terms of the songs that we're playing, because once we've got, like, it's almost like a key going into a lock. You get the right set, and then you can unlock the door, and you get in the lift and shoot up to the, you know, to the higher plane, whatever that thing is that you get to in a gig, where it feels like, wow, we're in a different universe. You know, we've transformed the atmosphere in this place completely with these people all together, and the right set kind of is like a key in it. You for us, if we change that key, it almost throws us off.
Right.
So it's like we do keep the songs in the same order once we know we've got them down. But but each night it's amazing how different it is there's always a different feeling every single time you because it always sounds different in every single space. Every space has its own
the
sound,
acoustics and stuff.
and so you react to those. And so some nights, like singing will be amazing. Some nights, like in the space, you can just feel all the vocals just flying to the end of the room, and it's easy to sing. It's just it's wonderful. So it becomes, you can really explore the vocals and the harmonies. You can push them a bit and kind of surprise each other a little bit with what you're doing, and your bandmates will react to you, and you can really hold on to notes and really enunciate. And then other nights, it's like singing into a sock, it's just dead, and the room is just horrible for vocals, and it's no. So then you need to find some other way to express yourself, and that's when like the power of the band comes into play. And it might be the funk that you're feeling off the drums that night that's like, oh man, that's where it's at tonight. It's all about the drums tonight. So every night it's like a little bit different. And I honestly don't think we've ever played the same gig twice. It never feels like we have, and we must have done thousands of hours, So it's funny. You always find a way to kind of reinvent your songs each night, or at least I've found that with us as a band. Maybe it doesn't happen with all bands, I don't know, but I think if it didn't happen, we'd have stopped a long time ago, because it would just feel like, what is the point, the
9 to 5, getting up, going to work every day.
Exactly. Music, this should be bigger than that somehow. It should get you way further.
I mean, related to that as well, obviously you re-released your first album. Are there any songs that you prefer not to play? Because I mean, I know that you there are for example, Radiohead, when they played Creep and it was their massive hit, and then they killed it. They just did not want to play it anymore, and then they started playing it again. Does that happen to you, especially with your earlier songs, your earlier hits? Is that something that you tried to kind of not play, and then maybe it's come back again? Or you found a way to play them to kind of revive them again?
We haven't. We've kind of always, it's funny you bring up the Creep thing, because we actually used to talk about that when we first started. Our A&R guy who signed us to Source Records, he was called Philippe Ascoli. He had a really good conversation with us in the early days when we were kind of beginning to do that thing. I think we'd had like one quite successful single, and I think he'd heard us kind of go, we've got to play that again, because we'd just been playing it and promoting it loads, and we began to play that game with ourselves, where it's like we were losing interest in it. And he said to us, I know you guys all grew up listening to bands like Radiohead, and you really respect all these bands, but he said, with Radiohead, do you think you would know or care about Radiohead if they hadn't had the hit with Creep? And we were like, oh yeah, of course, like they had to have Creep in order for all the other stuff to happen. And and this was in that era when they'd abandoned Creep, and he was making kind of a point that he's like, never forget that it's the music, in some ways it's bigger than you, and maybe you need to be a bit more like a caretaker of those things, rather than seeing them as your this horrible thing. And then funnily enough, and then Radiohead obviously had gotten over that. They re-embraced it, and so they obviously did this big circle. But I think because of that, in a way, we'd already sort of come up against that idea, and sort of decided that hits are, if you've got some hits, embrace them, embrace them, because they're the catalysts to something bigger.